of God. Were he to withhold his breath of life or his creation-sustaining word, well, that'd be it, folks. Such a reminder of the truth about our human condition, especially coming as it has during the season of Lent, when above all we're to remember that we're but dust and to dust we shall return, is quite a call for inward reflection. During my Breakpoint This Week conversation with Shane Morris, I was reminded of a challenging book by historian Stephen Kyler entitled God's Judgments, Interpreting History in the Christian Faith. In the wake of tragedies such as 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina, some Christian pundits embarrassingly claimed to know not only that God was judging by allowing these calamities, but why and who he was judging. That's a different but just as unhelpful kind of hubris. And yet at the same time, the normative way the Old Testament understands any calamity is as God's judgment, though we're rarely given a full glimpse behind the curtain of God's intentions or reasonings. Rather than look outward, Shane Moore suggested in our conversation, we'd do better to heed the words of Jesus in Luke 13, when he was asked who God was judging in the collapse of the Tower of Siloam. Do you think, he said, that they were worse offenders than all the others living in Jerusalem? No, I tell you, unless you repent, you will all perish just as they did. See, God is working in history, even allowing calamities to accomplish his purposes. Even those of us who believe that are still tempted to bemoan the loss of control this epidemic reveals, a control that we never really had in the first place. At times like this, Christians shouldn't be caught in panic or the blame game or political footballing. When times are at their worst, Christians should be at their best. Already we've seen glimpses of this in China, where Christians who face state-sponsored persecution are taking care of their non-believing neighbors in the midst of a coronavirus outbreak. And that sort of behavior can only come from knowing that this world ultimately belongs to God, and that he, in the end, will wipe away every tear from our eyes. For Breakpoint, I'm John Stonestreet.
I'm Shane Morris with the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. Last August, we aired a Breakpoint commentary about the growing number of frozen embryos, perhaps in the millions, produced through in vitro fertilization and then abandoned, destroyed, or used for medical research. Not long after, John Stonestreet got an email from Hannah Streaky introducing herself, her husband John, and their daughter Hannah. Hannah, who is now 20 years old, was the first ever frozen embryo adopted in the United States. The Streaky family joins John today on the Breakpoint podcast to tell their remarkable story, discuss the ethical crisis in the fertility industry, and the need for Christians to support the adoption of these tiny lives frozen in our nation's laboratories. Here are John Stonestreet and Hannah, Marlene, and John Streaky.
Welcome to the Breakpoint Podcast. Back in August of last year, one of the Breakpoint commentaries that we sent out was called Millions of Frozen Embryos, an Ethical Blind Spot for Evangelicals. And it came on the heels of seeing a report. I've been talking about bioethical issues for a long time, and it's very, very difficult to keep up with. One of the things that's difficult to keep up with is the sheer number of what we're talking about. In this case, through the process of in vitro fertilization, excess embryos that are created in the fertility process that then, after a pregnancy is achieved or something else has happened in the host parents or the biological mom and dad, many excess embryos are created and then left in storage. And some fertility clinics that have kind of ethical practices around it have tried to deal with that. But the bottom line is that we are talking now about a level of, well, a human rights crisis that may be one of the greatest in the world right now. As we talked about back in August, NBC reported back then that frozen and abandoned embryos in U.S. fertility clinics may now number in the millions. If that's not a human rights crisis, I don't know what is. We talked about that back in August. And one of the things that we mentioned in that commentary, and if you come to breakpoint.org, click on the link on the homepage that says resources mentioned on the radio and podcast, we'll link to this commentary. But one of the things that we mentioned that Christians can do is to encourage what's called snowflake adoptions. This is an opportunity that some have taken advantage of to adopt these embryos that are basically destined to stay in freezers or eventually be discarded and give them a chance at life. So we offered that. It's one of the interesting, I think snowflake adoptions is one of the more interesting redemptive options that Christians can engage in. And just right after that commentary aired, I got an email. And my guests today on the Breakpoint podcast are the folks who sent me that email, the Streaky family, specifically Marlene, the mom who sent me the email, her husband John, and Hannah, their daughter. And what Marlene said in the email was that the very first snowflake adoption, well, is sitting in the studio here with me now, which is Hannah Streaky. And Hannah, first let me say welcome to all of you. But Hannah, I want to start with you. Welcome. This is an amazing thing. And I was so honored to get the email from your mom and have the chance to talk with you.
Yes, thank you so much for having us on your show. This is such a pleasure.
Well, listen, there's a new book coming out, and the book is about your story. And it's called A Snowflake Named Hannah, Ethics, Faith, and the First Adoption of a Frozen Embryo, published by Kriegel, coming out here soon. And we'll link to it in the show notes. Hannah, just quickly, and I'm going to go to your mom and kind of let her tell the backstory, but before we do that, tell us about yourself. How old are you? You're a student at Biola University, I understand. Give us a little glimpse of who you are.
Yes, I'm 20 years old. I'll be 21 in December. I'm a junior at Biola University studying sociology with a concentration in social work. I have about a year left till I graduate from undergrad, and I'm looking forward to continuing my master's program in social work.
So sometimes when folks have kind of a story like this, they're kind of, and maybe not ashamed by it, but they don't really know what to do with it. They don't want it to be kind of part of their identity or something like that. What do you think about being the first snowflake embryo adoption in American history? Is that really what we're talking about?
Yes. Yeah, being the first adopted frozen embryo is such an honor. I don't take that job lightly, but also I don't know any different. This is my life. I don't know anything else besides this being special to other people. But yeah, I've just taken it by stride. I love talking about it and sharing my story.
So one of the challenges of bioethics, and John and Marlene, I want to go to you here. One of the challenges when we talk about bioethics is that there are so many human lives impacted that are often hidden away. And if there's an example of that more than excess embryos created through fertility treatments, in vitro fertilization, and stored away. And we talk about embryos as if they're something else, that their tissue, their potential life. We use all of these euphemisms, just like we do in the abortion debate. And what everyone needs to know is that who we all were at our very littlest, right, was an embryo. And here you have a human rights issue at stake. I want you to tell a little bit about the story, John and Marlene. In fact, you can even put the mic right there in between you so you guys can weigh in as you kind of want to. But I'm so grateful that you reached out. I'm so grateful that you've written the book, again, A Snowflake Named Hannah, Ethics, Faith, and the First Adoption of a Frozen Embryo. So 20 years ago, where did this idea come from?
So John and I had been through infertility treatments, and this was about 1997. And we came to the part in our treatment, and the doctors had told us that I was no longer producing eggs, and so I was called premature ovarian failure. And so they offered us some options, and that was getting donor eggs, with my husband's sperm. And we were uncomfortable with that because that would be creating a life outside the marriage bond.
Right.
So I said to the doctor at that time, I said, well, do you have any embryos we could adopt? And he said, well, no one's ever asked me that question before, but yeah, I've got tons of embryos. Up until that point, they had donor programs for embryos. So basically, a couple would go to their doctor, and the doctor has remaining embryos, and you choose your embryos based on hair color, eye color, skin color of the people that created that child. We were uncomfortable with that because you don't donate life. And so that kind of started the whole ball rolling. But first and foremost, we wanted to know, what does God think about this? Because I have to stand before God someday and give an account of my